There are also those who claim that our reform efforts would ensure illegal immigrants. This, too, is false. The reforms I'm proposing would not apply to those who are here illegally.
And that takes you back quite a few years, doesn't it, to President Obama then addressing a joint session of Congress, talking about the virtues of Obamacare and assuring the American people that illegal aliens would not get benefits. Such was the extent of that whopper that the normally mild-mannered South Carolina Republican Congressman Addison Joe Wilson was heard to exclaim, "You lie." Now, to put it in context, President Obama had called another conservative criticism just before making this assertion. He had called it a lie. So I don't think Joe was out of line at all. And despite the fact that he spent the better part of 8 years apologizing for pointing that out, there's nothing to apologize for. Joe Wilson was absolutely right. Obamacare benefits have been and are being extended to illegals. And what does that portend for some sort of great compromise on the Dreamers? Let's again refer you to a headline we showed you last hour from Breitbart.com. Nightmare DACA Amnesty Dream Act will cost $115 billion thanks to Obamacare. So another multi-billion-dollar headache, all to try to evade or refashion what should be a straightforward decision in terms of the rule of law. Here to talk now about what actually is going on with health care and illegals, including those much admired dreamers in the partisan press. We welcome in via Skype from Tampa, attorney Brian Rotella, healthcare policy expert. Brian, we always appreciate your time here on Newsmax TV. Thanks for making time for us on this Monday morning.
JD, it's always a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Well, let's talk about it. The price tag, Breitbart says, to ensure all these illegal aliens, a.k.a. dreamers, if they get benefits, it's $115 billion. Do you see that number as accurate, or could it be even higher?
It's way higher, JD. You know me, pop culture, right? And I'm always getting us dated here, especially you and me. But remember the book and the famous play, The Man of La Mancha and Don Quixote, right? We sometimes feel that way. I think conservatives like you and I out there saying that government is not the solution to all of our problems. Well, for our dreamers, and I actually respect our dreamers, our folks that were born here, had no stake in how they got here, and they happen to be born here, and are immigrants. I actually do have some belief and some faith there. But I candidly see this as an impossible dream for them. When you try to mix immigration with healthcare policy, you've got a recipe for disaster. You have a recipe for increasing that bubble, JD, that I wrote about last August, in the Hill, when I called it the big Obamacare bubble, based on that same concept of the Big Short and the mortgage crisis. One of the most powerful scenes in that film, if you remember, and your audience remembers, were the two good-looking young guys who were the brokers that were making millions of dollars driving 7 Series BMWs. What did they say they were doing? They were giving subprime loans to immigrants, and they loved doing that because the immigrants couldn't read, they didn't understand the policies, and they just signed wherever. And these things had these terrible balloon payments. What happens when you start giving these immigrants health care on the Obamacare exchanges? You are putting them into a healthcare system that's not sustainable. What happens when that balloon pops? That's the question I think we should be asking, and that's the danger of combining these two very, very important issues into one.
Well, let me ask you, by your estimates now, and perhaps it is because of EMTALA, the Emergency Medical Act passed years ago, anybody who shows up in emergency rooms cannot be turned away by law. And certainly, if anyone watching has spent any time in emergency rooms, especially in a border state like Arizona, it's pretty obvious the clientele, a lot of folks who probably are not citizens. Is there any way to quantify just how much money we have spent on health care for illegals in the United States with American tax dollars?
Oh, JD, it's in the billions. And look, I mean, again, I keep going back to what we had with the collateral-backed mortgages in the banking industry, because the analogy is just so straight on point. And my fear is maybe the bubble isn't bursting this year. Maybe we are in the late 90s of where the mortgage crisis is, and it's still 6 or 7 years out, but it's coming. And to your point, why? Well, the reason that Obamacare was put in place, and you and I have talked about this before, is large health systems that really run the healthcare system in this country, large hospitals, and the insurance companies that in many cases own them, they got tired of people showing up, including immigrants, in their hospitals. They could not deny them care. They stayed in the hospital or got readmitted, and they had nothing to pay for their bill. So what happened? You had expanded Medicaid under Obamacare to cover a good chunk of these people. And then you took the federal subsidized dollars for those families, or excuse me, individuals making between $10,000 and $40,000 or $48,000 a year. They had tax-paid subsidies to get on the exchanges and start buying these healthcare policies. What is any of the proposals that I've seen so far going to do? And when, again, you're combining the immigration issue with healthcare, big health systems win, big pharma wins, big insurance wins. Who loses? The middle class, who's paying for all of it, and candidly, these immigrants as well, because eventually they aren't going to be able to pay these high deductibles. They're going to have a whole bunch of health care, and the rug's going to get pulled out from under them.
Brian, you talked about this being a bubble reminiscent of what has gone on with mortgages, and we subsequently saw that that infamous fiscal meltdown of 2008. Are you saying that type of storm would be the end result of a Obamacare bubble bursting?
JD, the housing market, I just looked at these numbers the other day, knowing I was going to have the pleasure of talking with you, makes up about 16% of the U.S. economy. You and I both know the healthcare system makes up 20% of the U.S. economy. All you needed was 8% of the U.S. economy on the housing side to fall apart, and we were where we were in 2008. If we continue down the path that we are continuing on and ensuring subprime risks, and this isn't to be mean or hateful towards people that don't have insurance right now or immigrants, but my God, JD, if folks are coming in and they have what's the first thing you do when you go to the doctor? You get a history and physical. What do they ask you? What was your mom's background, your dad's background? These folks aren't able to provide any of that information. What types of risks are we taking on with federally taxpayer-backed dollars? And ultimately, the more and more of these risks we're taking on, like I said, big pharma, big hospitals, big insurance is going to get richer. At some point, this bubble will have to burst. And I'm going to be like the character Steve Carell plays in Big Short. Maybe I'm Bubble Boy, but I really do believe this bubble is going to burst sometime in the next 2 to 5 years.
Well, that is a most sobering forecast. I would ask you this, Brian Rotella. I'd ask you to stay with us, because coming up, there is late talk that there is, in fact, an Obamacare replacement that is moving forward. And the irony, of course, is one of the architects of this Dreamers Amnesty in terms of the DREAM Act, one Lindsey Graham, a.k.a. Lindsey Grahamnesty of South Carolina, is an architect of something that they're trying to claim is really federalism. Brian, stay where you are, because we want to come back and talk about what's happening on the Hill, perhaps even today, and its implications vis-a-vis that healthcare bubble. Stay with us.